Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning, excuse me, I'm on the East Coast, and welcome to today's webinar presentation. Before we begin, I'd like to review a few housekeeping notes. Today's presentation will offer 1.5 CPE credits, one credit. It is an hour, In order to be eligible for the CPE credits, you must answer at least 3 of the 4 polling questions during the webinar and have a total viewing time of at least 50 minutes. CPE will be available in 7 to 10 business days after the webinar. We will be unable to grant CPE credits in cases where technical difficulties preclude eligibility. CPE program guidelines prohibit us from issuing credit to those not verified by the technology to have satisfied the minimum requirements as stated. And in accordance with the standards of the National Registry of CPE sponsors, CPE credit will be granted based on a 50-minute hour. If you do have trouble with the CPE polling questions, please put your answers in the Q&A box, and we will monitor that to be sure that you do earn the credit. And now I'd like to introduce Roseanne Bump. She's the Executive Director of FEI Twin Cities. Welcome, Roseanne.
Good morning. Thank you. It's good to see everyone here this morning. It's great to see all of our members, strategic partners, and guests that are joining us today. And I do want to take a moment to welcome all of our FEI members and guests from Ohio today. It's great to see all of you. We're thinking you may have signed up because you know George Boyages, our moderator this morning, is a big Ohio State Buckeye fan. So that may come up, not sure. We are excited to have the Cresa team back with us again this morning. I believe this is now the 3rd session with Cresa in the past few months on the real estate topic. It's an ever-changing landscape, and we look forward to the discussion of the hot topics and actionable advice. I'll start the program in just a couple minutes. I want to do a couple of announcements. As you may know, FEI is a membership organization. Our mission is to advance the success of senior finance leaders, their organizations, and the profession. If you know someone that would benefit by increasing their network or engaging in learning opportunities, please invite them to attend a meeting or to contact us for more information. And we do have a great member special right now, including free registration to FEI's Leadership Summit, which is coming up in just a couple weeks. This features outstanding speakers, and for those of you that need CPE, it offers a whopping 26 credits. So I hope you'll consider joining us there. We host multiple opportunities each year to connect and network with peers and industry leaders and to provide content and forums to stay on top of and ahead of industry trends. We hope you'll join us for these additional programs. We have many events lined up. They can be viewed at feitwincities.com. We encourage you to take a moment to register now and then defend your time because I know you're all busy. A couple of events I want to highlight is next week, October 7th, is a very timely session on burnout prevention and recovery for high achievers. Dr. Donna Marino coined the term high achiever syndrome and has developed a protocol for taking back control and creating sustainable peak performance. She'll take us from frustrated and overwhelmed to innovative, energized, and focused, and all in an hour. On October 23rd, we have Trends in ESG Sustainable Finance. This session will address the ESG landscape as well as sustainable financing strategy. Topics covered will include ESG in the bond and loan markets, type of CapEx that can be financed, and the rise in sustainability-linked structures. I want to mention too that we will be hosting a brief networking session immediately following this session. It'll be an informal chance to connect with other FEI members and our guests today. We'll make use of Zoom breakout rooms, and we'll have a couple of topic ideas to discuss with your fellow members today. So look for a link in the chat box on that. I'll post it now and also toward the end of the program. When you see that, please cut and paste so that you have that. Once this webinar closes, you can paste that into a new browser and it will bring you direct into the networking portion. So we hope to see everyone there. And now I have the pleasure of introducing George Boyages, our moderator for the session. George is the Vice President of Corporate Solutions for Cresa Minneapolis. George, it's all you.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Roseanne. Appreciate the opportunity to be part of the program today. I've got a much easier job, for those of you who watched the debate last night, than Chris Wallace had. I can tell you. So I don't anticipate that we're going to be shouting and yelling and doing all of those sorts of things. So I think it's going to be a fun and informative program today. So for those of you who don't know me, I know we have a number of folks from other chapters around the country. I'm a 25-year FEI member, CFO for 4 different companies here in the Twin Cities. Before 12 years with Cresa. I've now been with Cresa about 12 years. It's been a tremendous amount of fun being part of this organization. For those of you who don't know Cresa, we're a strategic partner here in the Twin Cities, but we are the largest commercial real estate firm, both here in Minnesota and globally, that exclusively serves corporate tenants, corporate users of space. So we're excited to be part of the strategic partnership group here at the Twin Cities chapter. We're actually going to be presenting at this year's summit as well, FEI Summit Conference. And so looking forward to that as well. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is introduce our panel this morning. And so we have, and what I'll do is I'll introduce it in the order in which the speakers are going to be presenting. And so Nicole Nelson is actually first up this morning. Nicole is a project management senior advisor for us. She also leads our relocation management practice. Again, she joined about the same time I did, so about 12 years of experience here at Cresa, and serving clients with project management, owner's representative, relocation management requirements ranging from 2,000 to 200,000 square feet, anywhere here in Minnesota and anywhere in the US. Nicole will be leading us off, and then we'll follow up with Sue Grimm. Sue is a principal at Cresa with, Sue, I think 22 years experience. And leads our industrial practice. She also leads our real estate tax appeal practice. She leads our services to some of our largest global industrial clients. She is our global real estate expert here in the Minneapolis office of Cresa. So welcome, Sue. And then Jim Voss is another principal here at Cresa with 30 years of experience. So we've got a really tenured group here for you today. Jim leads our downtown practice, downtown Minneapolis practice. He also spends a great deal of time with office clients, both here in Minnesota and elsewhere. And so I think we've got a really great lineup for you here today. So with that, I think we've got a polling question to start off on real estate hot topics and actionable advice. So Nancy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, George. Your first polling question is up on your screen now. Where are your facilities located? Are you in Minnesota, Upper Midwest, throughout the United States, or global? I'll give you a few seconds to make those choices.
And that'll give us a few seconds to figure out what we're going to talk about today.
All right.
Do you want to make sure that?
Yeah.
Actually, I want to thank you for saying I only had 22 years of experience. I've actually been at Cresa for 22 years. I was a few places before that, but you made me younger. Thank you.
And there are those results.
Great. Well, that's helpful. As George said, we do work both locally, nationally, and internationally. And so it's just helpful for us as we think about our remarks today to be able to frame those in ways that will be helpful to all of you. And so we'll certainly, I will up with some focus on Minneapolis, but we'll make sure we spend some time on broader trends. And that's one of the reasons we wanted Nicole to start out. Nicole's expertise, our firm, gives her probably I would say more expansive hands-on view of the actual workplace experience. And as we start to wonder about how we shift from this COVID shutdown and get back toward the office, we thought it'd be best if Nicole could start out with some of the conversations we're hearing about just changes in the actual workplace, separate from the transactional side of the real estate, just that broader view of kind of what does return to work look like and how are things changing. So Nicole, why don't you take it away? Unmute, please, Nicole.
Damn. Doggone it.
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Excellent. So I think we can all agree that this honeymoon phase of working from home is over. Don't get me wrong. I definitely like things about working from home, no commute, increased time with family, a bit more flexible. But there's also some very tangible obstacles, and we'll talk a bit about that more shortly. But I wanted to start by just sharing some data points that have recently come out. There's been several workplace studies that have been conducted by different groups, and they're all publishing very similar data, which is that 88 to 90% of workers want to return to the office in some form or fashion. DLR group, for those of you who aren't familiar with them, they're big here in Minneapolis, but also nationally. And they did a really great study, and they found, and not surprising, I'm sure to any of us, that since working from home, we are spending 59% more time in meetings. And it's easy to see how that happens. I can't just pop down to visit with Jim or Sue or George. Sometimes, you know, I'm lucky and I catch them on a phone call, but usually we end up having to set up a meeting. So you can see how Zoom fatigue is setting in. What I found most interesting, though, about the survey that they shared is that there's a very strong negative and positive reaction to a single idea. So the top concern that employees have returning to the office was their proximity to other people. In the same token, 88% of those respondents indicated that they were most excited for in-person social interaction. So, you know, it's a balance. And the next three items that scored highest were a desire to have connection to company culture, separation between work and home, and returning to a new routine. I know I'm ready to sign up for all of that. So just a few tidbits there. I think those are all positive signs that people are willing and ready to return to the workspace. Perhaps the more troubling data that was released was that productivity is dipping. So it didn't take long into the pandemic, about 6 weeks, and productivity kind of plateaued. And in the last 6 weeks, it is steadily declining. And we'll cover some of the whys of that in a bit. But all signs are pointing to us coming out of this pandemic with some sort of hybrid model. There won't be a one-size-fits-all. The office won't be dead, as some may suggest, because you just can't attract talent, have culture, mentorship, or innovation without an office. But that office sure as heck is going to look a lot different than when we all left it back in March, or it could have been earlier, depending on where you are in the US. So space will need to be reimagined by tenants and landlords. Quiet work will likely continue to take place at home, where collaborative, team-focused tasks will start happening in the office. Other integrations that you are going to be seeing when you return to office, touchless technology will be implemented as much as possible from the moment an employee enters the building until they place their butt in their seat. There's going to be better building ventilation. That's going to be a top priority, both retrofitting and just state-of-the-art HVAC in new construction. Shifting just a little bit to how the workplace feels and where we'll work physically when returning. And Jim and Sue, I don't mean to talk too much real estate, and perhaps you'll be speaking more to this, but there's been a lot of chatter on a migration out of downtown to the suburbs. And when I say that, I'm not saying that corporations are going to be sprinting to, 494 and 35W. What's being talked about is kind of a hub and spoke model where there'd be satellite offices to serve staff in different geographic areas, which would in turn minimize commute to downtown, which, if you recall, lack of commute was one of the benefits of working from home that so many people really enjoyed. But on the flip side, I think, you know, how can you attract and attain talent with that model and keep that cohesive feel of one company? So more to come on that, but certainly something that that's being predicted at this point. I could honestly probably have a full hour conversation with all of you on workplace. I'm just so passionate about it. But Jim and Sue have some really important things to talk about. So I just want to cover a few last things here on why I feel it's so important that we return to workplace and why we can't all work from home forever. First and foremost, growth of a company is dependent on innovation. Innovation happens when people come together. It's critical to be in the office for that. Same with creativity. In order to grow your business, you need to generate ideas, and generating ideas happens when people come together. Well-being, many of you may be familiar with the term WELL. It was kind of the hottest trend, if you will, of metrics to determine the health of a workplace to promote the well-being of employees. And it was something that across the board, we're seeing our clients wanting to integrate into their design. And recent surveys are showing that over 50% of individuals feel like their well-being is suffering due to the lack of in-person interaction. So just reiterating the need, I think, to have separation between work and home. And lastly, we're certainly going to see more of an integration of technology. That'll continue, but you know, technology, someone once told me technology wasn't meant to be siloed. It was meant to meet with human interaction. And I think that's so true, and something that we've all sort of learned during this pandemic. So as we look to transition from full-time work from home back into the office, you know, the biggest piece of advice I could give you is to have a solid change management plan. Yes, it can be done via email or an employee website, but change management doesn't really, you know, take hold until there's an awareness, a desire, which clearly with 88 to 90% of employees or those surveyed wanting to return to the workplace, there is a desire there. We need to educate the employees. Behavior needs to be modeled by leadership, and reinforcing of what the expectations in these new environments needs to take place. And many of those things just happen better in person. So change management will be integral into your return to work plan for a safe and agile environment.
Nicole, thanks for your comments this morning. You know, as I reflect on some of the things you said, one of the things that really kind of comes to mind is, you know, all the conversation that you hear about, you know, air handling systems and some of those sorts of things. You're part of the team that helps companies really challenge the return to work process. And so what are you seeing our clients look at in terms of some of the air handling challenges that they're facing?
Sure. So, you know, I think we're still really early on in that, but we're certainly ensuring better ventilation, more circulation. And I would say that, you know, you can anticipate probably HVAC costs to increase probably between $1 and $1.50 per square foot for the state-of-the-art HVAC systems that will distribute air more cleanly moving forward.
Very good, thank you. I think we've got another polling question that we're going to be taking, but I would like to just ask the audience to post any questions you may have in the Q&A box or through the chat feature, and we'll go ahead and address those as they come up. So
Thank you, George.
So the next polling question, Nancy.
Your next polling question is up on the screen. When does your organization plan to bring back the bulk of your employees? Already back or never left? After a vaccine or proven treatment is made widely available? Partially less productive? First quarter next year? To be determined. We're going to stay virtual for now. We'll give you just a few more minutes because that was a lot to choose from. Okay, it seems I have almost everyone answered. I'm going to share those results.
Wow.
Still a lot in the to be determined area.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, so Sue, I think we're up with your comments on the national real estate market updates.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk national and a couple of global stories because I think it does tie back to what's been happening in the commercial real estate markets. I'm going to split it into three separate categories. One is industrial, one is retail, one will be office. I'll start with industrial and industrial distribution space. The pandemic has boosted demand for industrial distribution space significantly over the last 6 months. E-commerce spending grew roughly 30% in the second quarter versus the prior 3 months. And the whole year, it was increasing 4% per quarter. So that was obviously a significant increase of people working from home, people not wanting to go out. And that in turn has driven a lot of distribution needs. Big box, high bay distribution spaces are being absolutely gobbled up. Chicago is a big hub in the US, and that you can't find any high bay distribution space there right now because everybody is gobbling it all up. Shifting to manufacturing. Manufacturing is also stable. A lot of manufacturers did go back to work or bring employees back to work with safety precautions. A lot of them have safety measures in place as the employees come in with taking their temperature, PPE, social distancing. But it also brought another interesting thing to US corporations manufacturing in China. A lot of manufacturers figured out that having all their manufacturing in China probably wasn't a good move during this pandemic. They had a lot of problems getting things out of China during February, March, April. And so they have shifted some of their manufacturing into other Asian countries to kind of reduce their risk, their future risk. US-based companies with China operations shifted more manufacturing back to the US to also minimize that risk. So it was on the manufacturing side, I think globally was more interesting. There's a lot more movement, a lot more risk aversion on that industrial space. Moving into retail. Retailers traditionally used a single warehouse with a few smaller distribution sites to support stores with a certain geographic footprint. However, with the 2-day shipping race fueled by COVID-19's disruption, that has blown that model out of the water in 6 short months. Now they are looking at an example of Best Buy has unveiled plans to convert 250 stores to warehouse to meet their shipping needs and their online orders. Grocery stores have fared very well in this environment. We have 2 grocery stores that we do business with here in the Twin Cities, and their store sales in April, May, and June increased by over 100%. And so they are doing very well. Their biggest problem is obviously getting things into the stores. because they're leaving the shelves so quickly. As far as retailers who were shut down, restaurants, stores within big malls or malls where you actually have to walk in them. I'll use the example of the Mall of America because that's familiar to everybody I think it's familiar to everybody on the call. They're struggling. They're struggling with the perception of people not being able to go into the mall safely. What measures is the mall taking to make sure that, the people can come in and safely come in? People aren't going out shopping as much as they did before for fear of catching COVID-19 in a community area. We also in certain states have had shutdowns where retailers, including restaurants, couldn't open. And so the retailers that are doing the best are the ones that either gravitated to online quickly or store pick where you can pick up outside the store. This obviously doesn't help the retailer that's inside a mall. They struggle because they don't have that ability to have somebody drive up and pick something up, and they don't have the ability to do as much online shopping. They frankly may not be set up to do that. On the, industrial is doing very well. Retail is struggling, and I'll carve out anyone who sells groceries within their store. They're not struggling as much. The one thing I will say, we did see that there was a lot of folks from the tax departments. If you are in retail, and I'll start on office in a little bit here. If you haven't looked at your real estate property taxes to see if your value is correct, you should. Retail is going to struggle for a while now. And so if you aren't having those looked at, you should. Moving to office. And I think Nicole kind of in that poll we just took said, we don't know what's going to happen. And there are a lot of studies out there. There are a lot of predictions out there. So what I tell you today may change next week. It just depends when they come up with a vaccine or a proven cure. This could all what I say today could all change on the office market. New studies predict increased vacancy and negative absorption for the next year as companies decide what their new office normal will be. As the economy and employment recover, the globe's office sector begins absorbing space in Q1 of 2022. So really for the next year, they are predicting it is going to be a struggle globally for the office market. And they are also saying we will not return to the office market as it was pre-COVID until 2025. It will be a slow bring back. One of the things that we at Cresa are noticing with our customers, which we find this very interesting, and nobody really talks about this. So US companies, we feel, fall into three categories. The small office user, less than 2,000 square feet, are using their office space at a higher percentage than any of the other office users, normally because they already have social distance within their space. They don't have cubes. They have offices, or they have an office and a conference room and a reception. So the smaller the space, the more they're using their office. Medium and large office users with office cube configurations are generally sporadic in their office use with limits on the number of employees in that office at any one time. We represent a few very large office users. Those office users are not in the office with mandates that they have no in-person meetings. We work for two very large office employers here in the Twin Cities, and they don't know when they're going to bring their employees back, which is consistent with what the poll said that we just talked about. One of those said they will not bring their employees back until there is a proven vaccine for COVID-19. Both medium and large office users are struggling with plans for the return to work strategy. So are either giving up their office space at their natural lease expiration termination option, or subleasing, or they're doing short-term 1 year or 18-month renewals. We are not seeing anybody that we work with nationally or globally renewing leases for a significant period of time. And the one interesting note that I will say about office space and globally, China is 100% back to work. They do not have any restrictions on any of their employees. So from where this whole thing started, I find that interesting. Don't know if it's the right choice, but I thought that was an interesting thing that we learned about a month ago, that they're all working.
Sue, thank you for the overview on both a U.S. and global perspective. You lead our real estate tax appeal work in the U.S. And so as we look at the different product types, office, industrial, retail, medical, where do you see the real estate taxes, the opportunities for real estate tax reductions being the greatest going forward as a result of the pandemic and the valuation issues? And then I do want to acknowledge that we do have some questions that have come in, and so we'll get to those questions here in just a minute.
Yeah, I would say from a real estate tax appeal standpoint, if you are in retail space or office space that you own or you lease 100% of the building, you should have that looked at to see if you are overvalued. We are going to go into a little bit of a dip here on both those types of spaces. It's just the way it is. I mean, and the assessors know it.
So that presents a nice opportunity for companies to take a look at cost reductions with respect to their real estate if they can be successful in a real estate tax appeal.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, a couple of quick questions then. One that came in, what will happen to the malls with the record bankruptcies, particularly mall-based retailer bankruptcies? And then a related question, do we see mall landlords providing rent concessions, including $0 rent for a period of time for mall-based or other retailers? And Sue, I'm not sure if you'd prefer to handle that or if Jim, might prefer to handle that. I'll leave it to either one of you two.
I'm going to let Jim handle that one.
Yours, you take it. No. Retail landlords are probably feeling the pain more pointedly than any other pool of owners in the market. Well-capitalized retail landlords are trying to be creative. Many of you might notice that there's been a series of articles recently. Simon Properties, who's one of the nation's largest retail landlords, has partnered up with some other private equity, and they're running around buying weak retailers, basically keep those stores afloat in their mall because they recognize that velocity is a really important factor in the success of the center. If more people are coming, more people will come. And so Simon's actually investing in retailers to keep the doors open and the lights on. They probably, as a landlord, are looking long-term at keeping tenants in place and will do what they can to make accommodations. They're going to be smaller landlords who don't have deep, deep pockets like that. They're going to be forced, because they have to pay their lender, to demand payment from their tenants. And I think this becomes one of those situations where the financial strength of your landlord is the determining factor in whether or not there's rent relief available to you. You know, we had this happen in the 2008 and 9 recession. There was a short period of time where, whether it was an office lease or an industrial lease or retail lease, landlords always asked for tenant financials. There was a window where we actually asked for landlord financials. We may be coming back to that in the next year or two, where we want to make sure that the landlords have the wherewithal to carry the property. And that is true as a retailer. You want to make sure that the lights stay on and the mall stays active. If you're in the office category and you're a large tenant and you've just signed a lease with $1 million tenant improvement allowance, does the landlord have the cash to actually make that deal? Or should you structure the lease with a lower net rent and a lower allowance so that you're a little less dependent on that landlord financial picture? Retail, again, is where I think that becomes most pronounced. Industrial, that's the least significant because the landlord contribution is always much, much less. but it is worth paying attention to who your owners are. And interestingly, as the market has shifted in the last 10 years to more and more institutional ownership and more publicly held REITs owning big buildings, it's easier than ever to go online and see how stable that landlord is. George helped me evaluate a landlord for a client of ours recently when we were getting some pushback on the terms of the deal. And we were able to go and find a fair amount of information about portfolio problems that particular landlord was experiencing elsewhere in the country. And it helped us get a better understanding of what their priorities were, what they were most sensitive to, and it helped us structure the deal. So it's always been helpful to know the enemy in some respects, but I think it's maybe more important than ever, and in some cases easier than ever, to pay attention to what your landlord's really going through and how that might impact their ability to work with you, whether it's rent relief or structuring a new deal.
Jim, you bring up
Is that helpful, George?
Yeah, very much so. You bring up some good points too about, you know, it's been a long time since we've thought about asking landlords to put tenant improvement dollars into escrow, you know, to provide additional security that in fact the TIs will get constructed, right? If it was maybe under six-figure TI budget, then you might not think about something like that. But you know, with significant opportunities, you know, that becomes a more and more important element, whether it's that approach or letter of credit or some other things that traditionally landlords have asked tenants to provide in the past. So it's interesting how the
Nicole and I are working.
Yeah.
Well, so Sue made the point that a lot of large tenants are reluctant to make long-term lease commitments. Nicole and I are working with a group here in the Twin Cities that just went through a pretty extensive soul-searching exercise, I'll say, but made the decision that they are committed to their facilities and they're committed to their team. And while the return to work might look different than the previous format, they are committed to that location. And so we just negotiated a 10-year lease extension for them. And that came with a sizable, almost $4 million tenant improvement allowance. And there was a conversation about whether or not we should require the landlord to escrow those proceeds and assure us that the money will be there, or if we can be patient and respectful and wait it out. And we decided to trust the landlord. Again, national institution, we believe they have the wherewithal to do it. And we structured the lease so that we have 2 years to spend the improvement money so that we can do some sequential renovations and again, make changes if it feels like return to work strategies would alter the way we want to lay out the space. Asking them to escrow the money for 2 years felt like an egregious request. So we're trusting that it'll go well. But you know, when you're in this $3, $4, $5 million tenant improvement range for a larger transaction, it's not a foolish question.
Sure. So another question, and Sue, I think it speaks to the point that you made, question that came in, are there opportunities to potentially repurpose any of the struggling retail spaces to serve the industries that are experiencing significant growth? Whether that, you know, might be, for example, medical clinics who are thinking about alternatives to the traditional medical office building, potentially looking at more retail-oriented spaces where you can drive up, parts, stay in your car until the doctor's office says, yep, you can come in. You don't have to worry about going up in an elevator with you know, 10 other sick people, that sort of thing. But Sue, you might speak to you know, what you mentioned about the Best Buy's pivot and the potential repurpose there.
Yeah, I think there are opportunities to repurpose retail right now. It's going to be tricky because those retail, especially the inline retail, that's going to be even more tricky because you have other tenants to consider in what you're putting into that space. And I really think there is going to be a lot of retail that is repurposed, and how that happens, whether it becomes storage space in the back and we have a really, really small retail footprint in front. You know, there's distribution challenges with doing that because most retail buildings aren't set up with 4 or 5 dock doors to do distribution out the back. It's usually just a man door or two. So it's challenging. I think with Best Buy's pivot, they usually build their buildings with 2 dock doors, so they have the ability to use that space as storage. It's fairly high. It's usually 20-foot clear, so they can stack. They can put racks in there. They can just have a small retail footprint in front. So yes, I think we are going to be seeing retail be repurposed to something else.
Okay, very good. I think before we turn over to Jim, I think we've got another polling question coming up.
Thank you, George. I've launched that polling question. Do you think your company's work from home experience has impacted the company's productivity? No difference, more productive, partially less productive, significantly less productive. Those are your choices, folks, and I'll give you just a few seconds to answer that third poll. Okay, I'm going to close that poll now and show you your results. There you go.
I'll comment on those results, and I find that interesting. We would hear 2 different voices on this, and Nicole mentioned it earlier, and I know she'll come back to it. Most employees would say, gosh, I like not commuting. This is great. I'm more productive. Most leaders, corporate leaders, would say, we've lost our internal communication, our apprenticeship, our informal learning. And I think the point of view depends greatly on who is answering that question in terms of whether we're more productive or we're better as a company. And as I say, Nicole wants to come back to that. Let me spend a couple minutes on some local market trends. I think what's happening in Minneapolis is not dissimilar to what's happening around the country. And let me use a couple fairly simple statistics to point that out. I was an econ major in college. I love sort of the big picture stuff. If you want to see where office occupancy rates have been historically, you can look at one very simple statistic, and that's non-farm payroll. The Bureau of Labor Statistics publishes that for small markets, big markets, states, nations. And as non-farm payroll goes up, office demand goes up. And when payroll goes down, demand goes down. And we've certainly seen that in spades in the last 6 months. Payroll's been wiped out. People are not coming to the office, and we could do with a lot less space. The challenge is, I think, post-COVID, how will people occupy space? Will be more space per person, but fewer seats in the office? I think that's the hybrid we're going to be going to, more shared workspace. But as Nicole said, the collaborative stuff still needs to happen when you're in person, and the quiet heads down work can be done when you're away. The net of that is that in Minneapolis right now, as a region, we're seeing demand flatten, and after 8 to 9 years of rising rental rates across the market, things have flattened off pretty significantly in the last 9 months. So since December, January, rents haven't moved. And most people in our market would predict that office space is going to drop in net rental rate in the 5 to 10% range by this time next year. Office space is, as many of you know, long-term decisions. These typically are 5 and 10-year leases. We did get access to some data in Minneapolis and in downtown Minneapolis in the last 9 months. So since the first of the year, about 70 transactions have come up. 25% of those have been short-term renewals, which is probably 3 to 5 times what we would normally see. And these are renewals that are 1 and 2 years in length. Still 75% of the lease decisions that have been made since the first of the year are 3+, so 5, 7, 10-year leases that are pretty typical. But again, a pretty significant shift in the number of really short-term renewals. We anticipate that that will be true, again, for the next 12 to 24 months until we're post-vaccine and people see some stability. The other trend that I think we're seeing in Minneapolis that's true in a lot of markets is that public transportation tends to favor the most dense urban areas. So downtown Minneapolis works as the concentration of employment because the light rail and the bus system favor that hub. As long as COVID makes high density transportation feel uncomfortable, people are going to be anxious about coming downtown. We're seeing the return to work and the utilization of buildings in the suburbs now approach about 5%. Downtown utilization is still in the 12 to 15% range. It's picking up, but again, the core urban areas, whether it's Minneapolis or Denver or Chicago, the statistics that we're seeing say that suburban utilization is picking up a little bit faster. We're not seeing yet massive migrations to the suburbs. There's a lot of discussion, and there's certainly some tenants that are doing it, but wholesale departure from the core has not yet emerged. Now, again, we're only 6 months into this. If you assume the average lease in the world is about 8 years in length for an office user, only a percentage of those come up every year, and only a percentage of those are decisions that could have even been made in the last 6 months. So I think, you know, the hard data will emerge, but we won't know until next spring and probably next fall whether the massive migration out of downtown really occurs. It's not as much cheaper in the suburbs as people think. Coming downtown has the beauty of public transportation and the economic efficiency of that. If you don't give people a bus pass or parking pass downtown, typically every employee has to drive to work in the suburbs, and not every employee has one car per professional at home. And particularly as we look at the, you know, millennial generation, where a lot of couples have one car because they're just used to living a different way. Going to the suburbs may force an employee to buy a car. And so, I mean, there are, you know, hidden expenses that come along with that. The other hidden expense that's affecting all of our space decisions is the fact that as we work from home, we need more space. The renewal rate for apartments in 1 bedrooms is substantially lower than it is for 2 bedrooms. And that's in Minneapolis and nationally. I was looking at that over the weekend for another client. The demand for space shifts, and as employees need larger spaces at home, they're going to be asking for not just a second monitor and a better chair, but probably more to pay for that larger apartment because the employer has forced the employee to take that work expense home. So I think Sue's points on office and retail industrial locally are true, that the office is flattening just because employment is flattened out. Industrial tends to stay strong because the demand for last mile distribution is strong. Manufacturing is going to be onshoring again, and we will see that drive demand. Some markets are going to see pronounced increases in demand for that high cube industrial space. We don't have a lot of that in Minneapolis because we're not a big regional distribution hub. If you're in Cincinnati or Chicago or Memphis, those kinds of big distribution hubs are going to see huge, huge demands for industrial space. Places like Minneapolis or Cleveland, you know, we're not going to see that kind of activity. So it is a little bit market specific. When you get back to the office space, it's really employment driven. So let me stop there. I want to be respectful of our time and give Paul a few minutes to talk about what's happening in the construction side, and then also make sure we take some other questions. So Nicole, why don't you come back to the construction issues and maybe a couple of other cultural points you wanted to make.
I think we have a question too to pop up that might be, help to be informative on that. Nancy, do you want to launch the next polling question?
Thank you, George. The last polling question is now on your screen. What strategies are you entertaining to reduce your occupancy costs per square foot? Negotiating landlord concessions, rent deferrals, abatements, blend and extend, downsizing, subleasing, giving space back to the market, real estate tax appeals, most or all of the above, and not applicable, no plans to reduce space or space costs. Those are a lot of options. I'll give you a few seconds more to answer those questions. Okay, I'm going to end that poll, folks, and share those results. That's a mixed board.
Well, glad to see that folks are taking a look at a variety of different strategies. Obviously, what makes the most sense for one company may not make sense for others. So let's turn over to Nicole to talk about the delays and the initiatives that we're seeing in getting projects completed on time and on budget from a construction perspective. Nicole?
Thanks, George. Before I dive into the construction, a question came in regarding company culture, working from home versus in the office. And I'm hoping that I understood the question correctly. So if I don't answer the way you were hoping, feel free to chime in in the chat box. So first and foremost, if you had a a strong, positive culture pre-pandemic, you're going to be in a lot better position to navigate the challenges working from home. Some of the ways that you can really foster your culture in this work from home is having virtual workshops, extending education opportunities, ensuring that staff meetings are happening, and probably most importantly is employees want to be hearing from their direct manager more frequently. That disconnect can create a little bit of unsettling. And I think too, just having and hearing updates on the state of the business are important too. I think post-pandemic, part of what will be important to the culture is ensuring that you're providing a safe and a clean environment for the employees so that they feel safe to return, obviously. So hopefully I answered that, your question. I'm going to dive into construction trends. So, you know, I'm having conversations on a weekly basis with those that are in the construction industry because that's what I do every day for my job. So they're experiencing impact not only on projects happening this year, but their pipeline through next year. And one thing that, you know, they all collectively, I think, you know, I hear from them on is that all projects were impacted in some capacity. I am chatting with them. I would say on average, they we're experiencing about 5% of project build-outs were canceled altogether. 25% were deferred indefinitely, and 25% they're just doing a short-term deferral so they can kind of evaluate what that they want to see others implement. I think what this return to office plan is before they move forward in making their decisions. And Jim spoke to that earlier. I will say that contractors are definitely seeing an uptick in the RFPs, which is a request for proposal. In the last 60 days, it was pretty much non-existent from when the pandemic hit through July. So, you know, I think that tells us that, yes, there's a pause to reevaluate. Most likely redesign is taking place, but the office is still very prevalent. Contractors are staying busy, but anticipating a slowdown in Q1 here of 21, which is to be expected with the amount of design work that was halted when the pandemic first hit. And they'll likely, you know, continue to see the impact of that slowdown reflected in pricing for projects that are going out to bid early next year. But I would say don't expect to see pricing lower overall because, you know, the reality is there's costs for upgrading the HVAC to meet the standards expected for employees to return to a clean environment. And people will be building out more private space. So those are things that will drive the costs up. As far as schedule impacts, I'd say the general consensus with those that I have spoken with is there really hasn't been an impact to what I'll call interiors, which is like carpet and paint, but new construction is definitely progressing a bit more slowly, just due to the distancing requirements that, depending on the project site, can really limit the number of subs who can be on site at any given time. There, of course, is the challenge of if there's a COVID outbreak on site, and, you know, we've seen a couple of those. They're pretty minor, and so the impact is minimal, you know. But, you know, I'd say contractors really have their hands full trying to enforce what the CDC and the Minnesota Department of Health guidelines, because it is hard for them to be doing their job in PPE every day. So they're really having to step up their monitoring to minimize those outbreaks on site. And most of them are implementing things that we're seeing in other places like schools with temp checks, health surveys. That's just all become a norm on the project job sites. Lead time wise, for those of you that may have a project in progress, unsurprisingly, there's significantly longer lead times for items that are coming from overseas. I know locally here, the design firms have been really in tune with that and are being very careful in what they're selecting. I'll also say that there's some clients who want to continue implementing their standards. And so for those clients, if they have overseas items, we are placing product orders very early on. Like we still might be in design development and we're placing the order for the product that they anticipate needing. So really kind of committing to a design in some regards very early on. And I would say light fixtures, tile, and wall covering are probably the biggest disruptions that we've seen as far as keeping projects on schedule. Lastly, I would just share that be fully prepared that there will be COVID and or pandemic clauses in contracts moving forward, everything from furniture contracts to construction contracts. Very similar to Jim, perhaps I think you had spoke a little very briefly on some of those clauses that are debated in even the lease as it relates.
Nicole, thank you much.
We have had.
Go ahead, Jim. I was going to say we've got about 2 minutes left, so maybe kind of a last word from Jim and Sue and Nicole before we sign off to the networking section.
Well, let me just really quickly to Nicole's observation there. We have had a few clients ask for essentially COVID clauses in your lease. If the building is shut down, is there some sort of rental abatement? It's been very rare that we've succeeded, but you know, I think it's worth continuing to try. It's typically you know, a civil disruption concept that if the building is unavailable for the tenant, should they get relief, the landlord's going to say, I still have to pay my lender, you still have to pay me. But again, it's possible. So I would continue to press the issue. In terms of last word, I would just say this. I think one of the topics that we didn't get to, and I'm happy to stay in one of the chat rooms if people would like to go there, the question of civil unrest and how that's affecting some of our downtowns in Minneapolis. You have to acknowledge that that's true. It's obviously true in Seattle and in Portland and in Denver and Louisville. I mean, there are cities where, you know, there's some societal impacts to real estate, and we can't be blind to those, but we also, I think, need to take them in the context of 5- and 10-year lease decisions and wonder about kind of the community engagement process that's separate from just where you park your car. So happy to take that offline if people would like to spend some more time on that. Sue, any last thoughts?
Good. Thanks, Jim. Sue, any last word on your part?
My last word would be everything is still going to continue to change. So be ready to change.
Very good. Nicole, your thoughts? One final thought?
I would just echo Sue's, be flexible and be prepared to have agile environments for your employees to return to.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, Jim and Sue and Nicole, for your commentary today. We really appreciate that. Audience, thank you so much for attending. We're going to do something that our chapter hasn't tried before. The networking on a virtual basis. And I apologize, you can't actually copy the link off of the Zoom screen, but I know that Roseanne has sent to all of the attendees that same link. Now, there's a process that you have to follow to get into the networking Zoom webinar. You actually have to copy the link and then sign off from this Zoom webinar, and then wait 30 seconds because we've got actually a second webinar that we have to launch. Then paste the link in your browser and go, and that should take you into the networking portion, the optional networking portion. So with that, I will sign off and say thank you so much, and hopefully we'll see a number of you in the networking room. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, George.
Thank you.
And thanks to the panelists for their participation today. Please take a moment and copy the link in the Q&A box before you disengage the meeting. And I will give you just a moment to do that. And then we will leave the meeting and you'll be able to join the networking session. Okay. Thank you very much, folks. You have a wonderful afternoon.